got an excerpt from The Goldwater Law Has Contaminated the Water. It's by trauma psychologist Ernie Vecchio. And this is really a fascinating piece that really gets you thinking.
Yeah, it's interesting how we often overlook the psychological side of leadership, especially when it comes to how it influences, younger generations.
Right. And this whole thing ties into this Goldwater Rule, which maybe you haven't heard of. It was passed back in 1986. And it was intended to prevent mental health professionals from publicly commenting on a public figure's mental state without actually doing a proper evaluation, kind of like an ethical safeguard. Exactly. And Vecchio argues that. While the Goldwater Rule was, well-intentioned, it may have inadvertently created a culture.
Right.
Where we shy away from really discussing the impact of a leader's mindset, particularly their ego. And this has ripple effects, especially on, impressionable teenagers.
Yeah, it's like we're tiptoeing around this huge elephant in the room. And Vecchio uses this really interesting image of a baton being passed down from one generation to the next. And this baton represents, values, compassion, integrity, that kind of thing. But imagine that baton getting contaminated with ego-driven ideals. Like, what happens then?
Yeah, that's the core issue, right? When leadership becomes more about image and just holding on to power, those essential values get twisted. And teenagers, they're observing, learning from us adults. They inherit this messed up baton. Just think about it. There are over 42 million teens in the U.S. right now, all absorbing these messages.
It's like we're handing them this moral compass, but the needle's broken. And speaking of messed up messages, Vecchio uses this really chilling example in the book. He mentions a comment from a former commander-in-chief who said that being seen with veterans or amputees, quote, was a bad look.
Yeah, talk about optics over values, right? And that statement really exemplifies how image can overshadow genuine human connection and ad rank. It's not just a one-off comment either.
Yeah.
Vecchio points out 4 major ways that this ego dysfunction in leadership can negatively affect teens.
Okay, so let's break those down. The first one is erosion of trust. What does Vecchio say about that?
Well, he argues that when teens see leaders acting hypocritically, saying one thing and doing another, it erodes their trust in authority figures and institutions. They become cynical and start questioning the motives of anyone in a position of power.
It's that whole do as I say, not as I do thing, but amplified on a massive scale.
Exactly. And this leads to the second impact. Moral confusion. Teens are still figuring out their moral compass right. And when they see leaders prioritizing image over integrity, it sends these mixed messages about what's right and wrong.
So they're left wondering, is it okay to cut corners if it means maintaining a certain image? That's a slippery slope. What's the third impact that Vecchio highlights?
Well, this one hits a little closer to home. Mental health strain. We live in a world where social media is constantly pushing this idea of the perfect image. And when teens see leaders behaving the same way, it just adds to their anxiety and feelings of inadequacy. It's like authenticity is undervalued, and they constantly have to strive for this impossible ideal.
Yeah, I can see how that would be incredibly damaging to their self-esteem. Okay, so what about the fourth impact?
This one's perhaps the most worrying. Vecchio calls it modeling dishonorable behavior. Teens might start mimicking the negative behaviors they see in leaders, things like bullying, excluding others, or just a general lack of empathy.
So it becomes this awful cycle, leaders acting poorly, and then the next generation potentially repeating those patterns. It's a pretty bleak picture. But thankfully, Vecchio offers some solutions.
He does. He suggests a few ways to cleanse the waters, as he puts it.
Okay, give us some hope here. What are some of the things we can do to address this?
He suggests revising the Goldwater Rule, as a starting point. Instead of completely avoiding any discussion of leaders' mental states, maybe we need a way to responsibly talk about how their behavior might impact others.
So allowing experts to, discuss these broader ego dynamics in leadership without actually diagnosing anyone specific, that seems like a reasonable approach. What else does Vecchio propose?
He emphasizes the need to redefine success. Instead of just focusing on status, wealth, or power, maybe we should start valuing things like ethical impact, empathy, and how a leader contributes to the community's well-being.
So shifting from that, what's in it for me, to how can I make a positive difference?
Yeah, I love that idea. It seems like a much healthier approach to leadership. Absolutely. And Vecchio also highlights the importance of accountability and transparency. If we hold leaders responsible for their actions and encourage open communication, we can start rebuilding public trust, which is so vital for a healthy society.
Yeah, it's about showing young people that actions have consequences and that integrity actually matters. What else can we do to kind of counteract this ego-driven culture?
Vecchio suggests highlighting compassionate role models. If we can showcase leaders who embody humility, empathy, and genuine concern for others, it can really inspire young people and provide a counter-narrative to all the ego-driven stuff they're bombarded with.
It's about showing them that there's a different way to lead, one that prioritizes people and values over personal gain. I think we need more of those examples in the world today.
I agree. And finally, Vecchio stresses the importance of encouraging reflective leadership development.
Yeah.
We need to help leaders develop self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and a sense of social responsibility.
So it's not just about what they achieve externally, but also about their internal growth and their capacity for empathy. That seems like a pretty holistic approach to leadership development.
It is. By nurturing those qualities in our leaders, we can create a positive ripple effect that impacts future generations. And this is where Vecchio's concept of the real derangement syndrome comes in.
Okay, remind me what that's all about. It sounds a bit ominous.
It's the idea that when a culture is so saturated with egocentricity, those behaviors become so normalized that they just fade into the background. We become desensitized to things that would have once been considered unacceptable. It's like a collective ethical numbness.
So we're surrounded by all this bad behavior, but we've become so used to it that we don't even see it as a problem anymore. That's kind of terrifying.
It is, and it creates this vicious cycle where these negative traits just continue to spread and become the new normal.
But Vecchio doesn't leave us completely in the dark, right? He offers some solutions for dealing with this. Real derangement syndrome, too.
He suggests that we need to recenter our values and prioritize living a humane life. It's a conscious choice we have to make.
It's about actively cultivating values like empathy, compassion, integrity, and letting those values guide our decisions and our actions.
Right, and Vecchio believes that this starts with recognizing that there is such a thing as normal in terms of ego health. He defines normal as a state where our actions align with our values and beliefs, basically walking the talk.
So living authentically, being true to ourselves, that makes sense.
It does, and he contrasts this with what he calls the abnormal state, where our ego kind of dictates our choices based on what's perceived as right or wrong by society, rather than what we truly believe is true or false.
So in this abnormal state, we're essentially letting our ego be our moral compass. And that's what leads to all these problems.
Precisely. Vecchio argues that when we're guided by our heart, which he sees as our true compass, we're more likely to make choices that are aligned with our authentic selves and contribute to the well-being of others.
I love that. The heart as our compass. Such a beautiful and powerful image. But how do we learn to listen to our hearts more?
He emphasizes the importance of evaluating how we measure success in leadership. We need to move beyond focusing solely on status, wealth, and power.
I think I'm starting to see a pattern here.
Yeah.
It's about shifting our focus from individual gain to collective good.
Right, you got it. We need to start rewarding leaders who embody ethical impact, empathy, and a genuine commitment to the well-being of their communities.
It's about asking, how are they using their influence to make a positive difference in the world? Rather than, how much money did they make? What other solutions does Vecchio propose?
He stresses the importance of promoting accountability and transparency in leadership. When leaders are held accountable for their actions, it builds trust and models integrity for the next generation.
It's about showing young people that ethical behavior matters and that there are consequences for unethical actions. That's a powerful lesson to learn.
Absolutely. And we also need to make a conscious effort to highlight compassionate role models, showcasing leaders who embody humility, empathy, and courage can inspire young people and offer a counter-narrative to the ego-driven model that's so prevalent in our culture.
It's about proving that it's possible to be successful and powerful without sacrificing your values or your humanity. Those are the kind of leaders we need more of.
I agree. And finally, Vecchio emphasizes the importance of encouraging reflective leadership development. This means incorporating practices of self-reflection and empathy building into leadership training programs.
So it's about developing leaders who are not only competent, but also compassionate and self-aware.
Exactly.
So it's about developing that inner observer, that part of us that can step back and see things from a different perspective. I can see how that could be a really powerful tool for personal growth. But Vecchio is talking about more than just personal growth, isn't he? He's calling for a cultural shift, a collective evolution.
You got it. He believes that highlighting compassionate leadership models is essential to this process. Showcasing leaders who embody balance, humility, and genuine concern for others can help to shift our collective values.
It's about demonstrating that there's another way to lead, one that's not driven by ego or personal gain, but by a desire to make a positive difference in the world.
Exactly. By shifting our focus to values like well-being, community contribution, and ethical impact, we can start to change the way we view success and ultimately the way we live our lives. He also emphasizes the importance of challenging the zero-sum game mentality that is so prevalent in our culture.
You mean the idea that someone else's success has to come at our expense?
Right. But what if we redefine success as something that can be shared and celebrated? What if we saw other people's successes as an inspiration rather than a threat?
That's a really interesting perspective. It completely reframes our understanding of success and encourages us to think about how we can support and celebrate each other's achievements.
Exactly. And this shift in perspective is crucial to creating a more compassionate and collaborative world.
This is all very thought-provoking. Vecchio seems to be advocating for a pretty radical shift in our values and priorities. It's a lot to take in. What are some key takeaways that our listeners should remember from this discussion?
Well, I think one of the most important takeaways is that leadership styles have a profound impact, not just on individuals, but on society as a whole. And that impact can be either positive or negative, depending on the values that are being modeled.
That's a great point. We often underestimate the power of leadership to shape our values and beliefs. What else should our listeners take away from this?
Another key takeaway is that ego plays a significant role in how we lead and how we live our lives. And when ego becomes the driving force, it can lead to a lot of dysfunction and suffering.
So it's about finding a healthy balance between ambition and humility, between striving for success and serving something larger than ourselves. What other insights do you think are important for our listeners to grasp?
His call for a collective evolution towards heart-centered values is both inspiring and essential. He reminds us that we have a responsibility to create a world where future generations can inherit a legacy of compassion, integrity, and a genuine commitment to the well-being of all.